Hello and welcome back. As we briefly touched upon the stages of change with the trans theoretical model, nice fancy word for stages of change, we touched a little bit on motivational interviewing. And so today we're going to provide something that's a little bit more in depth, but is again kind of more educational based so that you can all be a little bit more familiar with a way a person can practice. It's not a model itself. It's more of what I think I would call something that's more supplemental to therapy and is not a modality. So Dr. William Miller introduced motivational interviewing in a 1983 article in the journal Behavioral Psychotherapy. And he introduced the first edition that was written with Dr. Stephen Rolnick that was specific for treatment and prevention of addictions. And so Dr. Stephen Rolnick is a professor of health care communication in the School of Medicine at Cardiff University in Cardiff, Wales, United Kingdom. And this information is coming from the third edition of the book. And one of the things that I really appreciate about motivational interviewing and the work that they've done with it is because although the first edition was created to help with addiction treatment, the second edition became more broad, and so doctors were using it, dentists, sports coaches, and it was a way to help people not to get them to be motivated to change for the benefit of other people versus for the motivation for change for themselves. Interestingly enough, with the third edition, 90% of the book that was written was completely new. So that's one of the things that I appreciate because it's definitely something that they are committed and dedicated to making sure that they update the information to help people better use motivational interviewing when they are supporting individuals or people in their communities. One of or four broad phases and principles that they use are engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning. So again, one of the focuses, or I should say the main focus of motivational interviewing is really to ask open-ended questions and, again, not trying to get them to change because of the benefit of the person. It could be a therapist, it could be a coach, again, it could be a doctor, versus how you can talk with someone and see if it's something that they do or don't want to change. And I think that can be very difficult because it can be very, the word that might be used more professionally is ambivalent. So they might be aware of something and, the quote unquote positive and negative things that come from it. And even if there are more negative things, then they still might not want to stop what they're doing. And so take a little break there and see what information my mom wants to kind of add onto it.
Well, I think it's interesting that last statement you made also brings in the stage of change too, right? So we talked about the stages of change last time, and that also plays a role into this. So where is that person when you talked about ambivalence? So where are they in that stage of change? So that's one thing that you can look at. And then, I think motivational interviewing is such a profound way to really work with an individual in a collaborative way, right? So I'm not going to go in and meet with a client and say, I'm the therapist and I'm going to run the session and I'm going to be the authoritarian, if you will. That's not really what motivational interviewing is. It's more taking a step back and just being a guide through that process of what that person might want to change in their life, whatever it is, a behavior, drinking, smoking, making decisions. It could be anything. And so I think remembering that it's a collaborative approach where it's more conversational, right? And you talked about these open-ended questions, which are really critical in this, because if I'm sitting with my teenage daughter and I say, "Are you happy?" Nope. That's a very closed-ended question, right? So there are a lot of different ways to ask open-ended questions where we're trying to elicit, which is a big word in MI, is to elicit information from the person, to get the wheels moving in their brain, to get them to start thinking about some of their strengths, what are some of their challenges, what do they see changing in their life? Where are they at that stage? At what point are they in that thing that they want to change? And we talked about how change is hard and how we are really we fight change because we don't know what's on the other side. And even if we might know some of the positive changes from something we choose to change, it's that unhealthy, comfortable place again of being in that space and saying, nope, I want to stay right here because at least I know what this is. And so those open-ended questions can help to really identify things within the person, right? So it starts to get their wheels spinning, like I said, and turning. And, and so as their brains are kind of starting to wire up, they start to also feel things in their body. And I think that can be helpful when you're trying to figure things out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the words that they use for MI is evoking. So, like you said, how you elicit, and I think that it's a fun, fancy word, and sometimes doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And even evoking, right? Evoking is not necessarily like what do you mean to evoke, right? So I think if I call upon anyone who has seen The Craft. Evoking can be seen as kind of like to call upon, right? So you're like calling upon what they already have inside them, because when you think about MI, it has the person, regardless of they want to change or not, they're the expert in their lives, and so you can't necessarily motivate or demotivate someone to make change because that's ultimately up to them, and it comes down to how you talk with them, right? Like if you're empathetic, if you're, they say, are you directive? Like directive, non-directive, or like kind of like guiding. So it gives you a way to work with people, and MI is generally in the space of guiding. However, when you're kind of new to motivational interviewing or therapy or counseling, or even just, communicating, it can be easy to want people to do what you want them to do. So I think one of the easiest examples are doctors, right? Eat better, sleep more, exercise, do this, do that. Like they tell you what to do. They don't necessarily talk with you about change. They just kind of tell you what you should do.
Right. And it's not collaborative, right? It's being told what to do versus being involved in that conversation. And okay, professionals go to school, they get a degree, they get licensed. Really, what that affords people is education, is information that maybe, the general population doesn't have because they didn't go to school for that. So it just gives us the education and information, though we work with human beings. And so, again, they don't fit into the boxes. And so they are the experts on themselves. Regardless of how much education we get, we can use that knowledge and information and education to help guide, right? So it brings it
Mhm.
back to motivational interviewing. It's guiding and supporting an individual in their journey and letting them be the driver. So I've often said in my therapy sessions, you are the driver of this treatment. Though I do want to let you know, I do have a steering wheel and a brake just in case. And I think that that's really helpful because it empowers them to be a part of that and be involved in the decision making and what the journey and the process will look like.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think um, I'd say that's most of how it, in a sense, should be done, right? Like, how do you be with a person to not necessarily change them, even though, like, when we think like bigger picture, if we think about addictions and smoking, or obesity, or quote unquote unhealthy things or unhealthy habits, and we know that what healthy habits are, but that doesn't change someone's like motivation to change, if that makes sense, versus like how can you be with someone and not like, because like in MI they also talk about, even if you do like reverse psychology, it's not necessarily motivational interviewing.
No, it's not. It's a trap.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's like, I think motivational interviewing, it's like, what's your intention? And the intention is to not have an intention, versus allowing, like, holding space for the person to figure it out without, common therapy, practices, not judging them, open space.
Right, not giving advice, not trying to be the race car driver. It just doesn't. It generally does not work for most people. I don't know anyone who it has actually worked for where uh, they feel like they're gonna. I don't know that I would put my entire life into someone else's hands. So why would I expect that from others,
Mhm.
right? So I think it's more about working together.
Yeah, and I think that's what MI is intended to do. Again, it's not a therapy practice. It's not its own modality. It's funny because I'm listening to the fourth edition in the audiobook, and they were like, "Oh, it's not a cult. It's not like this is the end all be all. You have to learn this. And MI is not something that is the end all be all. So it's not something you have to use all the time, and yet it's a helpful thing because it helps you be more aware of what they call it, sustain talk or change talk. So like sustain means like, um, I'm aware of things, but I don't want to change. Like, kind of talking about like the negatives of change, and then change talk is looking at like the benefits, and like, I could be healthier or I could live longer, and those things might be reasons for them to change, but they might still be in sustain mode where they don't want to change. And I think sometimes, whether it's a therapist, a parent, a partner, they get really stuck in wanting them to change, that they try to force them or coerce them to do what they want to do, or, no, you need to make this change because it'll make you healthier, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, it's like when people feel like others force their religion on them or force their political beliefs. And so those are like taboo topics because they're very controversial and very heated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's similar to that in that, we just need to not, we can't make people change anyway. So I don't know why we try so hard and we use so much energy to do that. And I'm like, I want to save my energy for things that I want to put it into versus I'm just using all my energy to get you to change, get you to be the person I want you to be versus let's explore who you want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very different. And one of the things I generally say to people, I talk about when they use a lot of energy for something that's not helpful to them, is actually sometimes more harmful. I say to them, "How much rent do you get paid?" And I get the deer in the headlights stare. Well, what do you mean? And I said, well, how much money is that person paying you to use all of that energy? I'm not getting any payment. Okay, then why are you giving it away for free? Right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's just something to think about, and it can be really helpful when you're trying to support another person, whether it's in a therapy session, a doctor's appointment, a relationship, because motivational interviewing, interestingly, could be used in relationships. Learning how to be empathetic, learning how to listen, right? So, when we talk about listening, it's like undivided attention. Like, I am present in this moment with you. I'm hearing what you're saying. Body language. So, what do they say about body language? Uh, Communication is 10% verbal and 90% body language. So we are generally not aware of our facial expressions, our body movements, and things like that, right? I had a patient who came in and would have the death grip on the chair, and the legs would be moving in and out, sliding across the floor. And I observed that, and we talked about it. And it wasn't a judgment, it was just an observation, and that's how I shared it. And over time, the patient became more aware, so being more intentionally mindful of how am I presenting myself when and again, so the MI, right, the motivational interviewing. So what do you think is going on in your body? What do you think is causing that tension with the death grip? And that's exactly what I called it, on the chair. And it came down to grief and the loss of a spouse and a grandchild. And so it was just really interesting. And then to watch that transform over time by, giving that open space, providing a safe space, and just talking about the pain of grief. So, it's about, if I'm going to sit with someone and I have my arms crossed tightly across my chest and my legs crossed and I'm straight back, that is intimidating, right? So our stance with others plays a significant role in how we can communicate with them. And so sometimes we just sit in silence and we just listen, we provide that, or we have like softer eyes, a relaxed body, and things like that. It's much more welcoming and opening to others to be able to say to themselves, well, this looks safe, versus the other scenario of the tight body and, the frowned face, or, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that they talk about is counseling with neutrality, which I feel like that should be a general practice, and yet it's not. And as you talked about, like, oh, like, we're not here to change people, and like, they have the answers themselves, and it's about, the practitioner or the person, the therapist, the partner, the doctor, who can listen, ask open-ended questions, be curious, and not have an intention behind what they want the other person to do. And yet I think that can be difficult because of just the culture or society in general of these are the next steps and this is how you get to this point. And we have so much information and like lived experience of the people before us and outcomes that, it's just like, well, here is what you need to do, versus like, well, what do you want to do? What steps are you are you open to change? Like, are you willing to do these little things? I think informing someone is different than like telling someone what to do. And yet when people are informed, it's more of, like you said, the nonverbals of someone's tone of voice. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? So instead of being like being like, no, you need to change, versus like, I'm concerned that if you don't change, that this is what could happen, right? And then kind of having that conversation of like, where are you at with that? Like, depending on like the relationship that you have with the person. Like, again, if you're a doctor, it might be 15-minute visits. You don't have the time to do MI, and it's just quick. You come to the visit and then you leave. Versus like a therapist, a friend, a coach, a teacher, they might have more time to kind of sit with that person. And I think that's kind of, again, the challenges that some people face when, if they do or don't use MI or other kinds of communication skills.
Right, right. One of the things that I like about the MI too is like they call it the DARN C. So DARNC. And so it's an acronym, and it is so the D is for desire, the A is for ability, the R is for reasons, the N is for need, and then the C is for commitment language. So so an MI, it kind of breaks it down. And again, it's like a person is looking they're struggling with something, right? So they ask for help. I'm struggling with this thing. Okay. So, you have that opportunity to build a relationship with them if you don't already have one, and then really kind of exploring what that desire is in terms of the struggle, right? And so, I mean, if it's drinking, someone might come in and say, I really wish I could cut down. I wish that I could stop. And so there's a desire there. So then you're not going to say to that person, well, just stop drinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Running the other way. And so, and then kind of, and this comes in with a lot of, like a lot of the things we've already talked about, like having empathy, listening, and all of that. And those really open-ended questions to try to support the individual in finding what's going to work for them. Because at the end of the day, through all of that, they might say, no, I think I'll just want to drink. And you go, okay. And that is your choice, right? And then, they look at ability, right? So look at the ability versus the inability, right? Because we want to focus more on what are the things that will get them there versus the things that won't get them there, right? And helping them to identify those things from their version, right? So again, it's that collaboration. And then looking at the reasons, what would be the reasons why you would want to stop drinking or cut your drinking down, right? So we'll just use the drinking as an example. Goes back to the first edition, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over time, MI will change more, and it'll be broad and those specific, right, to multiple things versus addiction. And then kind of looking at the need in terms of, is it urgent that I stop drinking? Is it a necessity? And what that looks like for that requirement of change. And then the commitment for language. So that is really looking at, having an agreement or an intention towards changing behavior. And so it's called the Don C. Don it.
No, that's really cool. That's one of the things that, again, another thing that I like about motivational interviewing is that it's more, and I think that's the difficult part too, right? Because I would imagine working with someone, or having someone in your family, or having a patient who you see over and over and over and over again, and they don't make the change that you want them to have because it's like a healthy thing, how it can impact like your attitude toward them, and then how that in and of itself keeps them from changing because
Right.
you're trying to force them to change, or like your attitude's a certain way, and then it's kind of like they they double down on not changing.
Exactly. So you see that there's more of a struggle for them. I don't want to use the word resistant because I feel, again, we talked about that being more of a derogatory word. Um, they struggle with and kind of pull back, right? So they go back into the unhealthy, comfortable place. And I had a client many years ago that I had worked with. I saw her bi-weekly. She struggled with codependence on others. And it was really hard to sit with her every 2 weeks. And it was when I first started in the field. And boy, did I feel stuck in those appointments with her. And I tried everything that I could possibly think of, and things that she couldn't identify anything that was helpful for her. She literally would sit in my office across from me with her head down and cry most of the session and say, nothing works, nothing's ever going to change. She was just really in this stuck space. So I got creative and I had a conversation with her and informed her that I was moving her to monthly, which some people feel like, wow, that's kind of rough, right? How could you do that when she really needs support? And I had a conversation with her and we talked about the stuckness in the room and that I was feeling it too. And I said, you've been telling me that you're not getting anything out of coming. We've tried different groups and all kinds of different things to support her. Nothing was working. And I said to her, so you can think about it. I will schedule you in 2 weeks and then we will go monthly from there. So she came in 2 weeks later and said, I would like to continue coming in every other week and I'm willing to try. And that's all I needed. And she made a lot of progress. So sometimes it's just talking about the stuckedness that's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I challenge any clinician or any professional, if you are feeling stuck, trust me, that client is just as stuck, if not more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like you're overwhelmed by something that's happening to someone else that you care about, or someone you might be working with, it's 10 times worse for them, right? And again, it doesn't mean we have to allow behaviors to continue or to be mistreated or disrespected. It's more about, setting that boundary and being able to. I just had a brain fart. I don't even know where my brain was going. And yes, this even happens in sessions. It's a good humor technique.
Well, I think that's what happens, right, when people get stuck, is like even acknowledging it. And so if a person is like your previous client is like, nothing works and it's just crying, I think when you get stuck in that habit, it's easy to feel that way. It's almost like when I worked on the crisis line, you get they have regular callers and they call every day, same time, multiple times a day, or like multiple times a week, and it's the same conversations, right? So it's like, I don't want to live anymore, but I'm not going to do anything, or I don't want to live anymore and I have a plan. Like some are very detailed, and depending on how seasoned you are, you might react a certain way because you're like, no, like this is an immediate thing that we need to deal with. And I think that's the stuck part too, is like when people call a lot, they probably feel stuck and hopeless and helpless themselves. And the flip side of it is that they have that's their support line, like that's their support system is calling in, talking to someone, even if it's the same conversation. And so as like an individual, like if you see a person over and over again, how, like you said, you felt stuck and you just feel like helpless because you're like, what can I do? I've tried everything. And just acknowledging the fact that being stuck with them and then setting that boundary because it's like you don't want it to continue to be unhealthy versus, being like, it looks like it might be helpful to, go down to once a month. And then that kind of, allows them then to choose, like she did, is like, no, I still want to continue biweekly, but also to try. And I think that's a big thing is people, I wouldn't say they necessarily give up on themselves. They just kind of give up because they feel like, again, they're trying everything and nothing's working. And so what else is there to try?
Right. And what are they trying to change, the external or internal? So it was the internal that wasn't changing, right? I knew that. She didn't know it. And she had to figure that out, right? And so this particular client had lost her son. And so this was early, around the same time, shortly after, and sat in the office with me and said, "You have no idea what it's like to lose a child." And whoa, did that hit a raw nerve. And again, it was that pullback. So it's her pain, it's not mine, right? So separating that and saying, I can't imagine what it was like for you to lose your child, so kind of changing that around and and being able to just support her in her need. When all I really at some level wanted to just say, I know exactly what it's like to lose a child, so don't judge me, right? And again, that defense mechanism. So those are some of the things that come up for people as they're trying to work through things. And the motivational interviewing can really help guide the both people in the room, regardless of who, right? So it helps to guide and gives us tools, if you will, to kind of navigate those waters with someone.
Mm-hmm. So one of the last things that we want to leave you with today, again, a lot of the information that we have is based off of the second and third edition of Motivational Interviewing. The fourth edition just came out in August of 2023. And my mother also shared some information that she learned from a training that she had taken. And with the third edition, in the first chapter, I'm going to leave you with these 5 questions that you can use with yourself or with someone else. The first one is, why would you want to make this change? The second is, how might you go about it in order to succeed? The third, what are the 3 best reasons for you to do it? Four, how important is it for you to make this change and why? If you're working with someone, after the 4th question, this would be a good time to paraphrase what they said. This kind of goes on with listening and listening with empathy. So not just, trying to say some things, but, picking up on the meat of what they said, paraphrasing it. And then the 5th question you would add to the paraphrase is, so what do you think you'll do? So again, this kind of puts the ability to change or not change on them, and yet it still provides a space for you to have a conversation about it. And I think when you do that, you kind of can plant seeds. And again, If your intention is to get them to change because you want them to change, even if it's for, a positive reason, that could be the reason that they don't change. So hopefully you can use these 5 questions to be a little more neutral. And the next episode will kind of provide some examples of what motivational interviewing might look like. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add those, and we will see you next time.